It's we're on Mark chapter 2. Well, last week we left off with Jesus was going around the different places in Galilee. And the last portion of what we read was the man with leprosy. And Jesus healed him. And then it starts out in chapter 2. It says, again, he entered into Capernaum. So now, Galilee is the state, if you want to say it that way. Capernaum is the town. So Galilee was the northern portion of Israel, and it was quite large, fairly large. Like I said, it had over 200 plus villages in it, they said, at that day. So there was a lot of people, a lot of commerce going around, and he could go around preach at different places like he said they did last week. But his home base was Capernaum, and Capernaum was just off of the Sea of Galilee, a fishing village that was off the Sea of Galilee there. It says, and it was heard that he was in the house. We don't know whose house it was exactly. We know Peter lived there because the last time it talked about they were in Capernaum and Peter's mother-in-law was sick, and he went into the house to heal her. So it may have been Peter's house. We believe Mary Magdalene was somewhere around there. There is a town called Magdala that may have been from where Mary was born, but she may have been in this area. So we don't know exactly whose house it was when they showed this miracle, did this miracle. But we know on the Chosen, they were in Zebedee's house, which was James and John's house, is what they were showing.
That may be indication.
It could be. It could very well be. James and John lived there. Zebedee lived there at Siloam. So it could have been their house too. We don't know what house it was in. But it said immediately, there's that word again. 40 times it's repeated, okay, in this book. Immediately, many gathered together so that there was no longer room to receive them, not even the door, near the door. Mark is pretty interested in details. Okay, as we go through, we see different details that we don't see in the other Gospels. Matthew mentioned this, and Luke mentioned this story about the letting, I think it's both of them, letting down the paralytic and being, but they didn't say all this that he said, okay, that Mark wrote down. And it also told us that he was there preaching, and he preached the word to them. What was the word? What did we say last week that he went preaching? The good news. Okay, that's what he was preaching to them. The good news that he was there to save the sins of the world.
I was going to say Jesus, but he's Jesus.
He was telling them the good news, which was they need to repent and come to their senses, and that there's a Savior. There will be one that can save them. He wasn't exactly preaching about himself right then. He was teaching them there is a way better than the law. It's not better, but it fulfills the law. It goes on forth from that. And we learned that from
God, right?
I'm sorry?
Was he emphasizing God? Like?
He was preaching God, yes. He was preaching, he often said his Father. He was doing his Father's will. So, but he was preaching the news to them. This was good news. This was new news to them because they were serving the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's telling them, you can serve the God of today. Yes, you do have all this lineage in here, but now you can serve the God. That's the good news. God has come down to you. God's not just up in heaven now. God's come down to you. That's what it's saying.
It's present, not past.
That's right. Then they came to him, bringing a paralytic who was carried by 4 men. Now, we didn't know that it was 4 men before. Okay, this is the only mention that says 4 men. And when they not could come near him because of the crowd, they went up on the roof. They uncovered the roof where he was. One of the books says that they broke through the roof. So, typically what they had in the roofs of these times, they were what we would call concrete buildings, stone buildings, and they would lay logs across the top to make a roof, and then they would put grass, hay, sod, anything up above it to kind of seal it in, clay, anything like that and of course, if you're going to lean it a little bit so the water runs off, it's not going to stand on it. But anyway, it's pretty much flat roof. But some of them did have holes in the roof where they could go up if there was a stairway inside. Most of the stairways were outside of the building. You could get to it, and that's what we think happened here. He was in the building, and they couldn't even get close to him, so they had to get up somehow on the building, so it's most likely outside. They uncovered the roof where he was, so when they had broken through, they let down the bed on which the paralytic was laying. Okay? So, here again, it's emphasizing the preaching ministry of Jesus. He did, and it tells us in Mark 1, 28 and 38, 39, both of those chapters that we read last week, tells us that he was preaching. Now, he was avoiding the streets because if he started preaching in the streets, people would be gathering together and plug up the streets and everything. And Rome didn't like that. Anytime there were certain rules that they had at the time, no gathering of a certain number of groups, and there wasn't very many. Else that would, they might think somebody's trying to get together to start an uprising or something. Everywhere he went, people besieged him with requests for healing and casting out of demons, so that he was unable to do what he'd come to do primarily, which was preach the word. Yes, he was going to heal people, but he wanted to get the message out of preaching the word. Because of the crowded room, the friends of the paralyzed man had to lower him down through the roof. This was an unusual way to interrupt the sermon. Well, if somebody comes and chops through the car roof, it'd be great if it was crowded where people couldn't come in. But, bang down the door or something like that, that's a little different roof. And it goes without telling you what I said. The roof was usually made of thatch, dirt, or tiles overlaid that could be taken apart or torn up. And they lowered him down through them. The commentator Morgan said they uncovered the roof. Such a rendering is entirely misleading. The force of the word is that they broke up the roof of the house, tearing up the fabric in order to lower the man down on his pallet into the presence of Jesus. They had to do some work to get to Jesus. Okay? They weren't able to get to him in the first place. It wasn't easy to do, but they were determined to do it. His four friends was the faith that was shown that if they could get him in there. So, most likely, these four friends, one of the four friends, or all four of them, may have seen Jesus heal somebody already, and they knew that he could do it. Brother Epson, 5-7.
When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven you." And some of the scribes were sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, "Why does this man speak blasphemies like this? Who can forgive sins but God alone?"
Okay. As he's preaching, looking lo, behold, who's there? The Pharisees. Well, why do you think the Pharisees was there?
They want to see what.
He was raising a ruckus. They'd heard about him,
They want to see what.
and they just wanted to see what was going on and what was happening and everything. So they were there doing, and evidently they were in the house because they were sitting. They had a more prestigious role. As we see in the show, they go through the crowd, and the crowd kind of parts for them, because they're the highfalutin people. You need to get out of my way.
And they didn't believe actually what was going on. They just wanted to see it for themselves.
Well, they wanted to believe, I think, and see what was going on, who was doing this. This rabbi, okay, they called him rabbi or preacher, was different than any of the other they've seen. Typically, a rabbi or a teacher sat at the feet of a normal or another learned rabbi. like we see in the show, it shows us Nicodemus, the students listening to Nicodemus as he teaches back and forth. When the boys are brought up to the age of 12, they go to Torah school. And they are taught the Torah to go through and memorize it, talk about it, like our Sunday school, I'd much like to think. So they knew what was going on, but Jesus didn't sit at anybody's feet. Okay? To them, he was an unlearned, he was a carpenter, somebody from a no-water town called Nazareth, and just nothing good come out of Nazareth, as it said once before. So they wanted to see, what's all this about? What is this preacher doing? Now, John was just like, John was not a rabbi, John the Baptist, okay? John was a teacher, and he was extraordinary in his deliverance and kind of outrageous in his appearance, even more so than what Jesus was. But, so they were there just to try to keep tabs on him. I'd say it that way. That's what I would say. But, says we can imagine how the friends on the roof felt. They went to a lot of trouble to see their friend healed of his paralysis. I don't know what that was. And now the teacher only wants to forgive his sins. So to them, it's kind of a letdown. Oh, he's forgiven his sins. Oh, well, he's still going to be paralyzed. Well, they didn't realize what is the greater need right here. And that's what Jesus was teaching
Give
them.
his heart to Christ first.
He had a need that he was sinful and he needed a Savior. Okay? And his sins were forgiven. Even though that doesn't seem like a greater to us, because he was paralyzed, that he couldn't move, something was upon him. They call it palsy. So it's a type of a nerve problem where he could not control his limbs. He couldn't move them. He couldn't do anything like that. So that's why they had to carry him around like that. He couldn't go anywhere. Said we might imagine him shouting, "No, he's paralyzed. We want him to walk out, not just to be forgiven." But Jesus knew the real need was his greatest need. That's ours too. We need to understand our greatest need is not getting healed, which should be nice. A lot of times we don't like to live with the pain and everything, but that's what it is. Wiersbe says, forgiveness is the greatest miracle that Jesus ever performs. It meets the greatest need, it costs the greatest price, and it brings the greatest blessing and the most lasting results. A lot of times we say, oh, if we could just see a miracle. We see them every time when somebody's saved. We just don't recognize it. Yeah, we just don't recognize it. And the scribes, they used the right kind of logic. They correctly believed that only God could forgive sins. And they were, or are even correct for examining this new teacher. Their error was in refusing to see who Jesus is. He was God the Son, who was given the authority to forgive sins. The words suggest a gradual intensification of the fault-finding mood. First, a general sense of surprise, then a feeling of impropriety, then a final advance to the thought, why, this is blasphemy. And that's kind of where it struck them sideways that somebody would be claiming this. So again and again, during the life of Christ, the same dilemma was to reappear. If he was not divine, then he was indeed a blasphemer. There's no third way out. So it's either one way or not. And that's what Jesus, a lot of times he told them to keep it quiet because he wanted to reach the people before the Pharisees would shut him down. He knew the Pharisees would try to shut him down because it was not in the same rut as they were stuck in for 1,000 years or so. He came to talk to them about a new and bottom of page 3.
But immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they reasoned thus within themselves, he said to them, Why do you reason about these things in your hearts? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, Your sins are forgiven you, or to say, Arise and take up your bed and walk. But that you may know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins. He said to the paralytic, I say to you, Arise, take up your bed, and go to your house. Immediately he arose, took up the bed, and went out of the presence of them all, so that all were amazed and glorified God, saying, We never saw anything like this.
So when Jesus realized it, it says in his spirit, okay, perceived in his spirit. We don't know if that was his human discerning spirit, like we have, or his godly spirit. We don't know. But somehow, he reasoned within them, in himself, and he put them to the test. Which is easier, okay, for men? Both real forgiveness and the power to heal are impossible. But for God, both are easy. It's a logical assumption that if Jesus has the power to heal the man's disease, he also has the authority to forgive his sins. It's not one or the other. In a way, it was harder to heal the man than to forgive his sins, because forgiveness is invisible. Whenever we get saved, nobody's, right there. They may be checking you off, putting down your book, you got saved and everything, but they don't know. They don't see it. It's nothing that you can see with your visible eyes, but it happens. When something happens as a healing, everybody sees that. They know that that's happened. So, like I said, it may be often harder to understand that. Jesus also met the scribes on their own scholarly ground. The rabbis had a saying, there is no sick man healed of his sickness until all his sins have been forgiven him. To the Jews, a sick man was a man with whom God was angry. All right? So, if you got sick, God's angry with you. That's what the Jewish thought was. And here's a key phrase, the Son of Man. Jesus often referred to himself with this title. The idea is not of perfect man, or ideal man, or common man, but a reference to Daniel 7:13 and 14, where it says, where the coming King of glory, coming to judge the world, has the title Son of Man. So Jesus referred to himself this way. And otherwise, if he called himself Christ, which means Messiah or King, the Romans would get a little upset. Okay? They didn't want anybody claiming to be king or claiming to be Messiah. They didn't want the Jews to revolt. So he's taking this title, Son of Man, to himself. It's less controversial. Okay? Even though the Jewish people, the scribes and Pharisees, they knew what it meant. But to them, it was like, it wasn't like a code to the Romans, but it was, okay, yeah, that's something that's Jewish. We don't want to mess with that. It's okay. But if you say he's king, that's what gets them started. That's what gets them riled up. It says Jesus used this title often because in his day it was a messianic title free from political and nationalistic sentiment. Jesus, again, could have been referred to Christ or King. Those titles in the ears of an audience like the one who will defeat the Romans, not so much. Christ's favorite title was the Son of Man. That's the way he claimed himself, and he couldn't be easily attacked that way. So after this, he immediately went, he left and went to another place. And he told him immediately, rise up. He told him to rise up, take your bed, and walk. And again, immediately he did. There was Not a lot of waiting between the time. The guy just got up, was probably stunned that he could do it, and he got up and carried his bed out. And I could see those four guys just hooping and hollering and everything else and brought him in.
Wonder who patched the hole.
I don't know. Hopefully they went back up on it and so happy they patched it. We don't know that part of the story.
I can imagine the Pharisees that big.
Oh yeah. Well, they represent that by Nicodemus, when he was supposedly one of those out there seeing it, and he saw the guy walk away. He couldn't explain it. He was trying to put two and two together, and that's just not what he was seeing. Imagine if Jesus had failed. His ministry would have been shattered. The crowd would slowly leave the house, and the scribes would smile and say, he can't heal or forgive. The four men would struggle to pull up the paralyzed man who would look more dejected and embarrassed than ever. The homeowner would look at his roof and think it was all for nothing. The homeowner seeing it after it happened, it wasn't a problem for him. But Jesus did not and could not fail, because all he needed to heal this man was his word. There is wonderful healing power in the word of Jesus and the promises of Jesus for those who come to him in faith. This man came to Jesus in faith, even if it was the borrowed faith of his friends. Now, we don't know for sure, but we knew his friends knew that he could, so they were getting him all hyped up, and he was ready to get healed. All were amazed, it says, and glorified God, saying, we never saw anything like this. The experts in the law were hoist with their own petard. I didn't look that word up, so I don't know what that means. I guess their own ambition or whatever. On their own stated beliefs, the man could not be cured unless he was forgiven. He was cured, therefore he was forgiven. So Jesus conquered two things at once. He talked to them and said, well, what's easier to do, to heal him or to forgive his sins? And he did both. And that's what to them was amazed to the Pharisees. Okay, 13 and 14, Ruby, down at the bottom, page 45.
Levi is called to be a disciple. Then he went out again by the sea, and all the multitude came to him, and he taught them. As he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of
Alphaeus,
sitting in the tax office, and he said to him, follow me. So he rose and followed him.
Okay. Levi is a different name for Matthew. Okay. Mark and Luke call him Levi. Matthew calls himself Matthew. So we see, and it's like us. You've got, most of us have a first name and a middle name. Most people go by their first name first, but there are some people I know that go by their middle name first.
My grandparents, my mom did too.
Yeah. And my dad, he went by his middle name to his family. Whenever I would go around his brothers and stuff, his name was Thomas Edison. Okay. His twin brother was Henry Ford. Okay. So whenever the family was talking about, how's Ford doing? Well, what's Edison up to? Now, Dad was redheaded, so they called him Red. So that's a couple of things. But they'd call him Edison. They'd go by the second name. I don't know why. And so here again, it shows you the difference. Still the same person. But he saw Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. We know that. It said he was sitting at the tax office. Okay, where he would collect the taxes. And so, I don't know exactly what they show in the show is one box and one person, but I don't know if one person would be able to do it, because later on we see a bunch of tax collectors in Capernaum, and I'm sure one person couldn't take care of all the taxes for all the people. We don't know how big Capernaum was. Last week we was talking and said most of the cities were probably over 15,000 people in Galilee, except the very small ones. So, say it was 10,000 people. One person, that's kind of hard to keep track of 10,000 people.
Yeah.
So they had several tax collectors, and it may have been a house that they came in. And Matthew or Levi was in one of the spaces where he could see where Jesus was. I don't know. Or they may have different offices. We have different tag offices. You can go get your car tag anywhere in town. You know, it doesn't matter. But same way you pay your taxes, that's what they could pay it anywhere. They went mostly closest they could go. The Jewish people rightly considered them traitors, the tax collectors, because they worked for the Roman government. And they had the force of the Roman soldiers behind them to make the people pay their taxes. They were the most visible Jewish collaborators with Rome. So that's where we see that their family, they were almost ostracized. Like they wouldn't be a part of it. That's why we saw in the movie part where his family, his father rejected him. I have no son, my son's dead. Because to them, they're collaborating with Rome, and that's just keeping Rome in charge. So
Everybody had a job.
yes, but they're saying that's the worst job you could possibly take. Except it made them rich.
I always wonder if nobody ever did the taxes, how they get collected, you know?
Yeah. Well, they still had the priests collected some of the funds.
Oh.
All right. It wasn't the taxes to Rome. They were in charge of that. But they still had to pay taxes to the Jewish people as far as other things like for the sacrifices and things like that. They had to pay sometimes fees for it.
But they probably didn't treat priests the way they did the tax collectors.
Well, the priests were under God's rule. They could only do such. They couldn't do such more. Now, we know of some bad priests. Eli's sons were bad. Tells us that in the Bible. And so they were probably taking some on the side or doing something different. We don't know, but God took care of them. Here, they had a contract with Rome to collect so much tax. They were said, you need to collect. This is how many people's there, and this is how much they ought to be able to collect. So the tax collector, that was their job, to go about and collect that taxes. Now, they had to make sure they collected them. Rome didn't pay them anything. Okay? They didn't pay them a dime.
Wow.
So what they did, they just collected more taxes. You owe 10%, I'll take 12%, I'll take 2 for me and 10 for Rome.
Wow.
Or whatever they saw.
They had to get paid somehow.
They had to get paid somehow, and that's what they told them. You get your pay from how much you get from these people. So sometimes we see, and if you go back and look through the story of Zacchaeus, he tells them, I'm going to return to people fourfold.
Yeah.
What, I gave them. So we see that some of these, now you could have a good tax collector that went strictly by the books and only took what was fair, and Matthew may have been one of them, we don't know. Or he may have been just totally opposite. He may have been the worst tax collector there, and God changed it.
But just because of his job, naturally they didn't like it.
That's right. It's just like, probably the only job that I would say that everybody would agree on is if I was a lawyer, nobody would like me. Nobody likes lawyers.
And they always
Seems like.
good,
Yeah. They're always looking out for how to find
Not all of them are.
a way to, not all of them are, but that's the way. So he came to him and he said to follow me. He told Levi, come and follow me. Let's see. So what did Levi do? That he arose and followed him.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it showed us on the show. Matthew kind of looked around and he said, what are you doing? And he got out, locked the door, and gave the key to the Roman guard. The guard's like, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? He said, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm going here.
Following Jesus.
Uh-huh. So in one way, this was more than a sacrifice than some of the other disciples, okay? The disciples, even though they were fishermen, they could go fish. They could still live. But Matthew couldn't go back. Once he gave up that, he could not go back to tax collecting. Okay, the page 7 at the top, Bertha.
Now it happened, as he was dining in Levi's house, that many tax collectors and sinners also sat together with Jesus and his disciples. For there were many, and they followed him. And when the scribes and the Pharisees saw him eating with the tax collectors and sinners, they said to his disciples, "How is it that he eats and drinks with tax collectors and sinners?" When Jesus heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance."
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah, so he got right down to the point with them. Now this was after when Levi joined them. When Matthew joined them, they went and had a party. In the Zacchaeus story, that's what he said. Jesus was talking to Zacchaeus, and he said, "Come down from your tree, because today I want to go have dinner with you." And he said, "Oh, okay." And, went on down the tree. This was much like when Levi or Matthew turned it over, his turn. They had a big party, and he brought all his friends. Okay, all the other tax collectors that was there, and all the other sinners. We don't know what other sinners were there, but we know that there was a bunch of them. It says many were there. Plus, again, it seems like the scribes and the Pharisees, they followed Jesus around pretty heftily too for some reason. So here they saw him eating with these. Now you got to understand their houses. They're not kind of like our houses. Their houses they would have an enclosure, and it would be the door would be at the front, and it'd come out. Well, it may be an open area, okay, no roof. That may be out there where they have food and they eat, stuff like that, or even have their kitchen area, because the oven, you wouldn't want to have the stove or the cook place in there to get real hot. Some places they did, some places they didn't. And it was very small. They would have very small areas. Now, being Levi's house, we know that it was probably a little bit bigger than all that. But if you just look through the doorways, and it was like, this is the doorways open, but you're just looking into the open area.
It's just like today's tiny house, sort of.
Like that, but it was still considered their house. In Israel, we saw a lot of houses like this. You would go in through a doorway, may not even have a gate, but that was considered their house. Okay, in there. On old times, they probably had a wooden door there or something to close it, but it was a big open area. That may have been where they kept their animals, tied up or whatever. But they could just look in there and see who was there. They see everything, what was going on.
It showed the opening where people were walking by because there was no door.
Right. Says most people consider this a going away party that Levi threw for his friends upon leaving the tax collecting business. Jesus sat and ate with the tax collectors and sinners, and eating at the same table with these type of people was a sign of friendship and relationship. But the scribes and Pharisees see it the opposite way. If you're fraternizing with the lower lives, you can't be. You got to be a sinner too. Nobody associates with them. Nobody associates with tax collectors or anything like that. So the Pharisees objected to him keeping the company with sinners. The Pharisees were a respected, conservative religious group, but were often at odds with Jesus. Pharisee meant separated ones. That's actually what the names meant. But they went so far as they would separate themselves even from God's people. That's what kind of made it wrong. They would tout that, they're better than you, or they're better than them because I follow God. I know what's all this stuff. And not all of them did, I'm sure, but a lot of them did. They separated themselves from everything they thought was unholy, and they thought everyone except themselves was separated from the love of God. They thought they had an exclusive with God. This is where a lot of different denominations will keep the clergy as a higher status because supposedly they're closer to God. Well, we're all God's people. Our ministers, they have a different job than we do, but that job doesn't make them any higher in the status, in the eyes of God. Yes, that was their goal. They accepted it to go out and preach the gospel, but there's no better or no worse there. We're all the same. And Jesus went back to them and he said, hey, the sick people are the ones that need doctors. Not the whole people don't need doctors. And that's what he was telling them. I'm here to help these people. These are the ones that need help. You guys don't need any help. You know what you're doing, supposedly. I'm sure he kind of said it a little sarcastically, maybe. But they didn't realize. Like right there at the bottom of that, it says.
It wasn't. Some of them was on the attitude of, even if they needed the help, they didn't think they needed the help.
No, they thought they were perfect.
Yeah.
In their ways. It says Jesus is the perfect doctor to heal us of our sin. He's always available. He always makes a perfect diagnosis. He provides a complete cure, and he even pays the doctor's fee.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, one more story about Jesus. The disciples of John, and the Pharisees were fasting. Then they came and said to him, why did the disciples of John and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? And Jesus said to them, can the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days. Right? They were bringing up a point that his disciples, they were new to all this, okay? So he was teaching them how to do this. Now, John's disciples, they did fast. It showed them. Typically, they would fast, a Pharisee would typically fast twice a week. So John probably did also, and his disciples, he was teaching them to do. That was not a hard fast rule, but it was one that fasting brings you closer to God. It brings you down. It tells you you're reliant upon God for your food, so you have to go upon Him. So by Jesus bringing in the wedding analogy, Him being the bridegroom, when I'm here with the guys, how can they fast if I'm with them? When you're getting ready to get married, that's a joyous time. And they're ready and not, it's not time for them. But Jesus is going to be taken away. And when they do, then they will understand, yes, they will need to fast because there are going to be some things. Now, Jesus himself fasted. We know that. It told us last week. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights. But he did not require his disciples to while he was with them.
But yet it's in the Bible.
It is in the Bible.
That we should fast.
It is in the Bible.
Is that a requirement now?
I think if you want to draw yourself closer to God, you will fast. Some people aren't able to fast. Some people aren't able to fast food. You can fast other things. Okay?
There he says, but the day will come when the bridegroom will be taken away, and then.
That's right.
And then. Okay.
That's right. Everything after.
Now is the time to fast.
Right.
And when he comes back, we won't need to fast.
No, we're going to be in a glorious party for a long time. But yes, there are, typically, and why is it food that we typically fast?
And we think about that first when it comes to fasting.
Well, that's right, but it's because we know we get hungry. We want to eat, but that's denying yourself for a reason. And that's what fasting is. That you're denying yourself for a reason. Either you're praying for something specific or just in general to help you out. You know, there's lots of reasons to fast.
But it also makes, okay, if you get a fast, you're going to get hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start getting hungry, you're going to start thinking of the reason you're fasting.
That's right. Brings it back to
It
your
brings
life.
it to our mind.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, man, these things are difficult to do. They're not easy.
No.
And yet, he requires, we have it.
Right.
It's in our
Available. That's right. There are some times when we get down that we may, can't see a way out. And that's time to come together and to fast and to understand.
I always wondered about that because, like in my physical situation, I'm not allowed to fast.
Mm-hmm.
And
Fast
so
food.
what else do you fast? Because I always thought it's food.
You could do the opposite and spend time with him. I mean, you should be doing that anyway.
When you're alone, you do all.
You could fast television. You could fast watching, sports. Anything you want to make up there. I mean, that's the way people are today. Some denominations, they will fast meats, for a season. They just eat certain foods. Some people do. There's lots of things that they, are other than that. And some people fast both food and water. And some people just fast food. They have water. They take in water. So, that's just one of the things he's telling them. And then he goes on. Brother Everson, 21-22.
Says, no one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, or else the new piece pulls away from the old, and tear is made worse. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine bursts the wineskin, and the wine is spilled, and the wineskins are ruined. But new wine must be put into new wineskins.
Okay? And he brings this up now because he's starting to, it's such a change. I'm here now, so some of the rules have to change. The bridegroom is here, so these guys don't need to fast. That's what he's relating it to. Okay, you need to get a brand new wineskin if we're going to have some new wine. Okay, this is a new, something new I'm telling you. And either whether it's the old wineskin or the new wineskin, we have to understand. Now they reused their wineskins, but they didn't put new wine in them. In the old wineskins, they put old wine. Okay, because it wasn't going to ferment anymore. But the new ones would keep fermenting and it'd bust an old one. And they may have a patch on an old one, so yeah, it'll hold water or it'll hold something else, but you don't have to, you don't want to put it in the new one. So he's trying to tell them Jesus came to introduce something new, not to patch up something old. This is what salvation is all about. In doing this, Jesus doesn't destroy the old law or the old way, but he fulfills it, just as an acorn is fulfilled when it grows into an oak tree. There is a sense in which the acorn is gone, and it is. I pull out a lot of times. Those squirrels are working overtime now in the yard. They're planting those acorns everywhere. And then this spring, when I come up, there'll be a tree about that high, and I'll get my deal out, pop it up, and if you get all the root, if the little bitty acorn is still attached to it, and it is there. But it's not like it was. It's something new. It's a new tree.
They must have been busy.
Yeah. Iris, 23 and 24.
Now it happened that he went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and as they went, his disciples began to pluck the heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why do they do what is not lawful on the Sabbath?"
Okay. So this is one that is a ritual. Okay? God is, when he gave them the Sabbath, he gave them, it's a time of rest. All right? But the Pharisees put such explicit rules around it in their rituals that they made it where you couldn't do anything hardly. Anything that you did, here, this is what was funny. He said, at this time, rabbis filled Judaism with elaborate rituals. Ancient rabbis taught that on the Sabbath, a man could not carry something in his right hand, or in his left hand, or across his shoulder, a chest, or on his shoulder. But he could carry something on the back of his hand. Okay? With your foot. You carry something with your foot, or with your elbow, or in your ear, or your hair, or on the hem of your skirt, or on your shoe or your sandal. Okay? On the Sabbath, you were forbidden to tie a knot. Okay? Except a woman could tie a knot in her girdle. So, if a bucket of water had to be raised from a well, you couldn't tie a rope to get the bucket of water, but a woman could tie her girdle to the bucket and get the water. Rules and how to get around the rules, okay? That's what they made it done. I mean, that's just...
Well, the same almost with fasting. They knew when they were fasting.
Right.
They did it in front of everybody, and they had the long drawn out.
Right.
Let everybody know, oh,
So look
it's
at me.
me, I'm hungry, and can't eat, and all that kind of stuff. And Jesus he was completely blowing all that stuff out of the water.
Right. And all they did was they went through, and as they went by, they grabbed a grain of wheat, whipped it off, rubbed it in their hands, and let the kernels fall. Let the chaff fall out, pop the kernels in the mouth. So they were reaping, okay? And they were working because they rubbed it in their hands. And then they were eating with unclean hands because they'd done work and hadn't washed their hands. So that's the things that the rabbis was concerned with.
I think I read one article where they were breaking the law because they were working further than they're supposed to walk on the Sabbath day to catch these guys getting the stuff in the field.
Yeah, let's read what yeah, exactly right. Let's read what Jesus told to them. Iris, did you read already?
Yeah.
Okay. Ruby, 25, top of page 11.
He said to them, have you never read that David did when he was in need and hungry? He and those with him, how they went into the house of God in the days of the high priest, and ate the showbread, which is not lawful to eat, except of the priest, and also gave some to those who were with him. And he said unto them, the Sabbath is made for man, and not man is the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is also the Lord of the Sabbath.
That's right. He put them in a place that we don't, it is the Sabbath, and we need to try to honor that Sabbath. But when there's certain things come on, it can't totally rule your lives. There are some things that, David was in a fight for his life with Saul, and his men was hungry. They were running around away from Saul. He came to the priest at the time, and if you read the story, read the story, Abiathar, or actually his father at the time, I think, was there. It was that day they were replacing the day of the shewbread. Once a week they'd replace the shewbread in the temple, take it out, and then the priests could eat that bread. That's the only bread they had. That's what he said. This is the only bread we have in the house. The others out there on the altar, we can't go back in there and get it. It's only gone in there, once a week. So he said there's certain criteria they had to meet. Only supposedly rabbis could eat. But he said, only priests, I'm sorry. But they said, okay, there are special circumstances where you can go by that. David told that to the high priest, and the high priest said, okay, yeah, I realize that. And so it's tradition, ritual, and everything that was holding them back. It says this is exactly what many people steeped in tradition simply cannot accept, that God really wants, what God really wants is mercy before sacrifice. That to love others is more important than religious beliefs. That the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. These, O God, you will not despise. So, both of these, because the men hadn't been with women, okay, David's guys, and all these things, and they were very hungry, they were about famished, then they could break the rules. That was okay. They could do that. So they gave them to it, because that's some of the things. You read the story, and David said, yeah, all my men, we've been out warring. We haven't been with any women in forever. So, and they gave them the showbread, and they ate it. King Saul found out about it, and he killed the high priest. There's a guy that saw what was going on and told them, and they killed the high priest. So, but that's what happens. God made that, and David saw it, and he took advantage of it, and that's what he's using it for. And God's saying, you got one here that's greater than David, the Son of Man. Okay, the Sabbath was made by who? Who made the Sabbath?
Not David.
God did. And you got the Son of Man here, which is the Son of God. Okay? And he made the Sabbath. And when did he make man? The sixth day. That's the sixth. He made man before he made the Sabbath. Okay? That's what it means. He made man before the Sabbath. The Sabbath is not, man doesn't have to do the Sabbath. The Sabbath is made for the man. It was made for a day of rest for man. That's what God had intended to do. Now, you go back and you read some of the things that the priests have to do. They have to do it every night, whether Sabbath or not. If a kid is born, 8 days later, they got to be circumcised. So they got to go out and do that work.
Well, I think something happened like Brother Jefferson.
Mm-hmm.
He works on Sunday to preach to us.
Yeah.
That's a job. That's what he does.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if he didn't do that, why are we coming to church? You know?
Here again, it's what we're trying to get across, what God's trying to get across. It's a time of rest. For 6 days, Adam and Eve worked in the garden. Okay? And the work wasn't, best we know, it was tending the garden, which was probably going out and gathering their food. And, maybe gathering food to animals, I don't know, whatever, feeding them, doing whatever God told them. But that's what the Sabbath was for. And then they just rested the rest of the day. Because, hey, I got a couple of apples yesterday, I'll just eat them today and said, here, I don't have to go out and do anything else. That's what it was meant to do. But they added, the Pharisees and all, they started adding all these additional rituals, all these rules. You carry it on the back of your hand. You can't, the elevator, you can't push the button. I told you that before, I think. In Israel, there is a Shabbat elevator. Okay? That's the elevator the Jews use if they're in the town. Because you go in that elevator and it stops on every floor going up and every floor going on. So you don't have to push a button, because push a button is work. And you can't work on Sabbath.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, if it's an emergency, you can trouble.
Yeah. If you take the stairs, you're probably breaking Sabbath. So,
That old saying that
God.
power corrupts,
mm-hmm.
and absolute power absolutely corrupts. The Jews didn't, the Pharisees, the priests, they did that mostly to give themselves more power.
They did.
And to, you look out here, in the natural, you got all these rich people, these you used to talk about millionaires, now we talk about, won't be long, we'll be talking about trillionaires.
Yeah, that's right.
But they think they're so smart, and they want all the authority. They want to tell us, and even them, and most of them don't live by what they say.
No, because they have the money, they think they ought to be able to tell somebody how, the best way to, and that's crazy. Yeah, you got the way you did, your way. I'm not saying you, but the rich guy. And you go on, and it's like, well, 9 times out of 10, you did somebody dirty to get there. Those guys did, I guarantee you, because it's the way it is.
Oh my gosh.
So, I mean, that's what happens, so.
When I worked at Melton's, they used to sell ranges that had a Sabbath